My point is that my mother was born in 1951. She desegregated schools. My father was shot in the civil rights movement. Those people.
Let him finish.
I'm going to finish because you're being utterly disrespectful.
Not at all.
So I'm going to finish this comment. So what I'm telling you is that there are people in this country who fought, died, and bled for the right to vote. Don't be a dick.
Last night on Abby Phillips' show, there were twice as many MAGA supporters on the panel with Kevin O'Leary and Scott Jennings. And honestly, these two came across as unbelievably smug and annoying. We're going to look at clips of Bakari Sellers and Ashley Allison going head-to-head with Kevin O'Leary and Scott Jennings while pushing back against all the nonsense they were spreading. I also want to share my thoughts on the whole debate because there's a lot to unpack here, so let's get right into it together.
It's spreading. A battle over redistricting that is playing out at the Supreme Court as Republicans and Democrats try to gain an edge in November's midterm elections. Today, the court's conservative majority cleared the way for Alabama to use a new congressional map that would eliminate a district currently held by a black Democrat. The Supreme Court offered no explanation in its order, which tosses out a lower court decision that blocked the use of that 2023 map. But Justice Sonia Sotomayor joined the court's other two liberals and said that the order was inappropriate and that it will cause confusion as voters head into the polls in the next week's election. The decision hands yet another victory to Republicans just days after Virginia's Supreme Court struck down a measure that would have allowed Democrats to redraw congressional maps in their favor. Virginia Democrats are now asking the Supreme Court to reinstate that map. That seems like a bit of a Hail Mary pass there on the part of Virginia Democrats. But the broader issue is that, especially when you look at what's happening in Alabama, there's already voting underway in that state. They are planning to toss out that map, go with the new map that favors Republicans, eliminates a black district. And then you have the President Trump, sending a message to South Carolina, your home state, Bakari, saying the South Carolina State Senate has a big vote tomorrow on redistricting. He says, Republicans, be bold and courageous, just like the Republicans of the great state of Tennessee were last week. Move the U.S. House primaries to August. Leave the rest on the same schedule. Everything will be fine. Get it done. So we're going beyond new maps here. Now we're tinkering with the calendar. People are voting. Maybe those votes get thrown out. It's chaos.
I mean, not only is it chaos, but you're literally throwing out votes, as you said. I mean, I watched 60 Minutes with Governor Landry from Louisiana throwing out votes, and he chuckled about it. In South Carolina, people have already voted from overseas, and you chuckle about it. But I want to take a step back and look at this from a 50,000-foot view, to be completely honest. I think Ashley and I have to wrestle with the fact that we are going to be the first generation to actually leave this country worse than the one that we inherited. And I think for black millennials, the progress that our parents and grandparents gave us, that we're watching being ripped away from us, is something that our generation is going to have to really wrestle with in figuring out how we get out of this conundrum. If somebody fell asleep in 1896 and woke up today in 2026, they would simply say the only difference is now Negroes have a TV show and we wear nice suits. They swapped out Klan hoods for Brooks Brothers suits. And that is the problem. I mean, Plessy v. Ferguson was 7-1, and it gave birth to 50 years of Jim Crow. What we have with this court right now, what we're seeing is watching people who have fought and died and bled so that we would have access to the ballot box, so that we would have access to our voices being heard in Congress, being ripped away. And I think that there is a casual laughter from people we believe to be our friends on the right who are showing us true colors today, because the most sacred, or one of the most sacred acts you have in the United States of America, is the ability to cast a ballot and elect someone and send them to Congress, the State House, or a mayoral seat that represents your interest. And now black folks throughout the South are being silenced. And I don't find that to be a laughing matter.
Well, you know, Scott, I mean, if this were just about partisan gerrymandering, I think that'd be one conversation. But I think part of what's happening right now is that we're in the middle of a political cycle and maps are changing. I was reading an article today about Tennessee, and the lead of the article was two neighbors literally across the street from each other, one white and one black, now in Memphis in different districts. So it's more than just, are we redistricting according to partisanship? It's also, what are we doing in terms of creating a precedent for the use of power across the country, in red states and in blue states?
Yeah, it's a good question about redrawing in the middle of an ongoing election. In the case of Louisiana, you know, they didn't have a choice. The Supreme Court said their maps were unconstitutional. They had to redraw it. And so what they chose to do was I think what they'll choose to do is move the House back to the fall, and they'll leave the Senate primary in place, which is actually happening right now. So I get the argument about a little bit of confusion for voters. I mean, around the edges of congressional districts, you're always going to have some areas where, you know, one person on one side of the street, one person on the other. I live on the very western edge of a congressional district in Kentucky, in fact. If I might respectfully debate Bakari on this for a moment. To me, I heard you say that people are losing representation. People are losing their voice. No voter has lost their voice at all. No one's been disenfranchised. Every voter in America before these court rulings could go cast a ballot this November. And
They've literally thrown out votes, and Bakari Sellers brought that up right at the very beginning of the segment. Also, notice how much more quiet and controlled Scott Jennings is acting now. Somebody has clearly spoken to him, whether it was Abby Phillip, her team, or someone at CNN, because after Scott Jennings got completely embarrassed by Adam Mockler, he suddenly seems a lot more careful and less aggressive.
every voter in America, white, black, or otherwise, can go cast a ballot right now. The lines may be changing, but every voter still has the same amount of voting power, one vote, that they had. It's just that this Supreme Court said your race doesn't necessarily have to dictate your political identity. The fact that you're an American citizen and your franchise gives you one vote, that is your political identity. And it is incumbent upon both parties, Republicans and Democrats, to run people who speak not to just one constituency, but all American interests. To me, that's how the November election should be run.
Please.
Go ahead, Ashley.
I might agree with you if they hadn't said something different 3 years ago. We aren't talking about in Alabama a district that existed when my grandmother was alive. We're talking about a district that was drawn in 2023 because there are injustices that are still being placed. We're talking about Memphis, where we're not like, it's not just one person across the street. They split a whole city into three to make black voters have less power in House maps. The Voting Rights Act, which actually was the last time it actually was reauthorized, was under your boss, George W. Bush. It used to be a bipartisan thing. It used to be clear that the backdrop of this country, there is discrimination now. There was pervasive discrimination when the law was signed into law during the Civil Rights Movement. We can all go into our partisan corners, but to act like what is happening right now is not a direct attack on black voters' power, black voters' ability to represent themselves. Now, we had this conversation yesterday, Scott. Black voters are allowed to elect whoever they want. And in 2024, they did. They elected a black Democrat in that new district in Alabama. That black Democrat went through a primary of 13 people, and black voters found the agency to come and decide how that primary now will be erased. And put a black Republican up in that district if you want black voters to have a choice. But they're not. That's not what's happening. It is a dissemination, a distribution of black power. And to call it anything other than that, I just think is being historically ignoring the past of our country and pretending like we're not trying to drive our country to a different type of future.
Ashley Allison is absolutely right about what she's saying here. And when Scott Jennings tries to claim that they just want people who are going to represent everyone, that's hard to take seriously because Scott Jennings himself clearly doesn't believe that, and neither does the Republican Party. Their political leader, Donald Trump, constantly talks about Democrats like they're the enemy of the country, and you've got Trump allies and officials repeating the same kind of extreme rhetoric all the time. Pete Hegseth even made comments comparing Democrats to major threats facing the country, so let's not pretend this movement is really focused on representing everybody equally. The reality is they mainly care about protecting their own interests, and too often they ignore or push aside anyone who doesn't fit their narrow view of what America should look like.
Again, is it a guaranteed vote when people's votes have been thrown out? People have already voted and then the state says, we're going to start over again. Is that one person, one vote? Kevin O'Leary's an idiot, and we're going to get to that here in a moment.
That a state-based situation. Add this to the mix. At the end of the day, the state decides at the state level.
And again, how can anyone call it a guaranteed fair vote when people's ballots have already been thrown out? People already cast their votes, and then the state suddenly steps in and says they're going to restart the entire process all over again. How is that supposed to represent one person, one vote? That's the question being raised here, and Kevin O'Leary's response to it just makes him sound completely clueless, but we're going to get into that in a moment.
State-based situation. Add this to the mix. At the end of the day, the state decides at the state level. It's in the Constitution. Get over it.
So the problem with that sentiment is that you were born in 1954.
Yeah.
Okay. You're
Very popular.
You're 71.
Yeah.
Right. In 1954.
By the way, I'm a vampire.
During your lifetime, we've actually had Brown v. Board of Education.
I remember.
Yeah, Brown v. Board of Education. I don't know how you remember it. I think you were like 2 months old. But I'm not finished yet. Let me finish my thought.
Drill back to 54.
Yeah, because you're still alive, right? And so there's an entire generation of people. Brown v. Board, it overturned Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896. My point is that my mother was born in 1951. She desegregated schools. My father was shot in the Civil Rights Movement. Those people. I'm going to finish because you're being utterly disrespectful.
Not at all.
So I'm going to finish this comment. So what I'm telling you is that there are people in this country who fought, died, and bled for the right to vote. Don't be a dick. Just understand.
Okay. Bakari,
just,
please.
just
I'm not
understand.
a dick. I'm pointing something out to you. The Constitution is being upheld.
Hey,
Do you have a problem with that? Do you have a problem with the Constitution of the United States of America?
Bakari, I'm going to stop you because I just want everybody to reset with a modicum of respect at this table. Please stop.
I want you to understand.
I want to pause here for a second because before even getting into the actual substance of this debate, or honestly the lack of substance coming from one side, I want to talk about how Abby Phillip handled this entire exchange. She did the same thing before when Scott Jennings lost control during his debate with Adam Mockler, and now she's doing it again here with Bakari Sellers and Kevin O'Leary. Bakari Sellers was making a completely valid point, but Kevin O'Leary kept interrupting him and acting like he could control the conversation by constantly saying things like, "Get to your point." That's not Kevin O'Leary's role on the show. He's a guest, not the host. Abby Phillip should have stepped in and made it clear that Bakari Sellers had the floor, that he deserved to finish his argument and ask his questions, and then Kevin O'Leary would get his chance to respond after that. Bakari Sellers was absolutely right to call out Kevin O'Leary's behavior because he was acting rude and dismissive the entire time, and honestly Abby Phillip should not allow that kind of behavior to dominate her show. I understand that these networks sometimes want heated arguments and chaotic moments because they think it creates viral clips and more attention online, but that shouldn't come at the cost of having an actual serious discussion. And when it comes to the substance of this debate, Bakari Sellers and Kevin O'Leary honestly should not even be on the same level in a conversation like this because Bakari Sellers is clearly bringing thoughtful arguments, intelligence, and real points to the table. And Kevin O'Leary honestly came across like somebody who had no real understanding of what he was talking about. It's genuinely surprising to see how far he's gotten because most of the time he just acts rude, uninformed, and tries way too hard to be funny when the jokes simply don't land. During the debate, he even tried making some awkward joke about being a vampire after Bakari Sellers mentioned that he was 71 years old, and Bakari Sellers basically ignored it and kept moving forward with the actual discussion. Meanwhile, Kevin O'Leary kept repeating the same lazy line of, "Just get over it," while throwing around vague references to the Constitution, even though Bakari Sellers was clearly trying to explain the real history of the civil rights era and why that history still matters today. Yes, Kevin O'Leary was alive during that period, but as Bakari Sellers pointed out, he was a child at the time, and on top of that, he was living in Canada. So compared to someone like Bakari Sellers, who actually understands the history and impact of civil rights struggles in the United States, Kevin O'Leary clearly seemed out of his depth in this conversation. His behavior throughout the exchange felt arrogant and dismissive, and Bakari Sellers was completely justified in calling him out for it. Honestly, if Kevin O'Leary had stopped interrupting for even a minute and actually listened, he might have learned something from the discussion, but judging by the way he acted, that was never going to happen.
There's a price that was paid for this right. There is a price that we uphold. And whether or not you value that, whether or not you value that or not, there are people who bled, sweat, and died and were in prison for access to the ballot box. And what we're seeing throughout the South is that their voice, their vote, their representation, and people who have lived experiences to represent them are not being sent to Congress or where they need to go.
This debate, by the way, is happening among the justices.
And once again, Kevin O'Leary clearly has no real understanding of what he's talking about because he mostly just acts like a loud voice trying to overpower the conversation. The point Bakari Sellers was making is actually very important, which is that there are still people alive today who personally fought for these rights, and now Republicans are pushing policies that many believe are designed to slowly take those rights away. But Kevin O'Leary keeps brushing it off like it's all ancient history that no longer matters. The problem is that recent events have shown a lot of people that rights are not automatically permanent just because society gets used to them existing. Many people believed Roe versus Wade would never be overturned and kept saying that could never happen, but then it did happen, and that shocked millions of Americans. That's the larger point Bakari Sellers was trying to explain, that rights are not guaranteed forever if political movements keep working to reverse them over time. Republicans have repeatedly shown that they are willing to play the long game for years, even decades, to push their agenda and roll back policies they disagree with, and that's why Bakari Sellers sees these debates as serious and important instead of something people should simply dismiss or get over.
With the Louisiana decision, the conservatives are saying, we've made great progress, it's time to let go of this, of using racial discrimination.
And that's why I utilize the description of
and the liberal justices say exactly what you just said, Bakari, which is there's a history here that we're overlooking.
But Ellie, I mean, the 3 years have passed since 2023 and 2026.
Exactly.
So it's not that long.
All of a sudden, the country has made that much progress in 3 years.
That's the criticism of the majority. Look, there's a famous quote by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? When the Voting Rights Act came,
Who should have retired?
when the Voting Rights Act came up when she was on the bench, She said, the conservatives said, well, we've made great progress, so we don't need this anymore. And she said, I'm paraphrasing, but she said, that's like getting rid of your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet.
Yes.
And the question is it still raining? Is it drizzling? Is it clear? People differ strongly on that.
And guess what? It can be clear.
Or even, to change the analogy a little bit, well, it rained today and now it stopped raining, so I'll get rid of my umbrella because I'm not going to need my umbrella in the future. Just ignoring the fact that there are going to be other rainy days to come. Just because you have a right now, that the American people have a right, don't think that it's over and Republicans are not going to.
Or to put it another way, it's like saying it rained today, the rain stopped, so now you throw away your umbrella because you assume you'll never need it again, completely ignoring the fact that more rainy days are obviously going to come in the future. That's basically the point being made here. Just because Americans currently have certain rights does not mean those rights are permanently protected forever. People should not assume the fight is over or believe Republicans will simply stop trying to challenge or roll back those rights later on, because history has already shown that political movements can spend years working to slowly take rights away if nobody pays attention or pushes back.
And so that's the inconsistency.
And the crazy part is, go ahead.
I just want to point out the one person, one vote. I think, Bakari, us millennials will have to wrestle with how we're going to leave this earth, and I'm determined to leave it better than I found it. And I think that this decision is actually going to open a rush to reevaluate a lot of things, like you say, are in the Constitution. Because right now you have a hat on that says Utah, and they have more representation in the Senate than the people actually in Alabama have in the Senate.
I got a situation in Utah going on.
I know, that's not why you have the hat on.
No, I
but
have it on.
You have it on, and so there are states right now that have
supporting
2
the people of
senators.
Utah.
When we're sitting in a state right now that has more population than Utah multiplied by 10. And so if we really
don't like
want to
Utah?
talk
I
about,
love Utah.
I'm talking about all the states that have smaller populations. If we really want to talk about one person, one vote, and if we really want to go down a path to see what real franchise mean, you might have just opened a discussion that this country should be is timely to actually have.
Let's leave it there. Ellie Honig, thank you very much for joining us.
Honestly, at this point, I think Kevin O'Leary annoys me even more than Scott Jennings. The difference is that Scott Jennings clearly knows how to play the political game, while Kevin O'Leary just comes across completely out of his depth on these panels. He rarely adds any real insight or intelligence to the conversation and mostly relies on weak jokes and interruptions instead of actual arguments. Even near the end, when Ashley Allison was making a serious point, Kevin O'Leary jumped in with another pointless comment asking, "What, you don't like Utah?" instead of engaging with what she was actually saying. Ashley Allison was talking about how the Electoral College and the American political system often give smaller populations outsized influence in national politics, which is a legitimate discussion to have, but Kevin O'Leary either doesn't understand that issue or simply doesn't care enough to understand it. That's really the frustrating part of these debates. But let me know what you think about this entire panel and the larger conversation around voting rights in the United States. What do you think about the way Abby Phillip handles these debates, especially when she tries to treat both sides equally even when one person is clearly trying to make a serious argument while the other side is mostly interrupting and creating chaos? That's something that really bothers me. Let me know your thoughts on Kevin O'Leary, Scott Jennings, Bakari Sellers, and Ashley Allison down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'm Chris from Culture, and I'll see you in the next video covering all the latest politics and news stories.